He had underestimated the fierceness of the storm, the intensity of the cold, and the distance to the crossing of the deep canyon of the Rio del Norte, and then on to La Madera, where Chacon's rancho was headquartered. It had been foolish of him not to have taken a horse before leaving Taos. Hernando had to smile at himself. Horses were one of the few things he truly understood. Women, and women whose fathers insisted on wealthy son-in-laws, this was something he had no comprehension of. Why had he overlooked such a simple and obvious matter as taking a horse? After all, what would one more thing matter now to Jaramillo? He wondered briefly if perhaps he should have stopped at Turley's distillery in Arroyo Hondo when he had passed it earlier that evening. Turley was an amiable fellow who would have given him refuge for the night, a chair by his fire to warm his freezing feet, and a horn of aguardiente to warm his insides. But he hadn't stopped. He had feared that the delay might have given Don Francisco time to catch up with him. He couldn't permit that now. Ruefully, Hernando looked over his shoulder at the tracks he was leaving in the snow. Well, it couldn't be helped. Perhaps by morning, if the storm continued, they would be covered over. A horse would have been the smart thing to take. Hernando chided himself again. Then a sudden wry grin spread across his thin face. Being smart, like being wealthy, was an affliction which had never overly plagued him. Hernando strove on through the snow and the cold. There was nothing else for him to do now. Another hour passed. The pinon tree forest gave way to sage-covered flatlands of the high New Mexico desert, as the land angled gently toward the great river in the distance. The Rio del Norte, the Rio Grande as some called it, had its headwaters in the high mountains to the northwest, across the San Luis Valley. Hernando had never been any farther north than the San Luis Valley, but he'd heard a great many stories about those mountains from the friends of Don Francisco and from the Don's new son-in-law, Charles Bent. Bent had once been a trapper himself, and he still had many close friends among the Rocky Mountain men who traded at Bent's new outpost on the Arkansas River. Why, just the day before, while Bent and some trappers sat in Don Francisco's home near the fireplace, sipping brandy brought all the way from the United States, he'd heard a fascinating story from one of Bent's close friends, Kit Carson. Kit had been telling them about the big river called the Missouri, and of the grand boats which use steam power to climb the wide waters, thousands of miles from the nearest settlements. Kit Carson had been telling Charles Bent all about the trading forts at the Missouri's headwaters, for this was something which Bent was greatly concerned about, having just established his own trading house a couple of years earlier. Hernando had listened to their talk from a back room, where he'd been oiling Don Francisco's saddle while Geraldine, the Jaramillo's house helper, was polishing the family's silverware in preparations for the upcoming Christmas dinner. He could hardly believe what he had heard. A river that was more than half a mile wide. Why, even the impressive Rio del Norte was only a few 100 feet wide at its broadest. Hernando shivered again, and the memory faded, pushed aside by the bitter cold cutting through his cotton breeches and working its way through the sheepskin coat. How much more of this could he take? It had been foolish to start out on a day like this. Perhaps he should have waited. But he had so wanted to spend Christmas Day with his love. He had told Juanita of his plans to come to her the week before, when she and her mother had come to town.